The
Hey,
clubhouse
you
sat
need
at the end
this.
of Ridgeland
What is
Avenue
it?
like it had
Just
always
water.
been
Take
there,
it.
which it had for longer than
Hey,
most people in Fresno could remember. It was a low, flat building with a corrugated metal roof and a row of Harleys parked out front chrome, catching the late afternoon sun. The paint on the walls was faded. The windows were tinted dark. A flag hung from a pole near the door, barely moving in the still October air. It wasn't the kind of place people wandered into by accident. You either belonged there or you didn't. And if you didn't, you kept walking. Boon Garrett was leaning against the wall near the front door, a cigarette between his fingers, watching the street the way he always did. Not looking for anything in particular, just looking. He'd been a member of the club for 22 years, long enough that the leather of his vest had worn soft in all the right places, long enough that the road had carved itself into the lines of his face, and the way he stood slightly angled, like he was always ready to move. He was 54 years old. His hair had gone silver at the temples. His hands were thick and scarred from decades of engine work, bar fights, and the kind of living that doesn't show up on a resume. But his eyes were sharp, always had been. Boone didn't miss much. That's why he saw her. She came from the east, moving along the sidewalk with the slow, unsteady gait of someone running on empty. A girl, thin, young, too young to be out here alone, but Boone had lived in Fresno long enough to know that age didn't mean much on these streets. He'd seen 12-year-olds with the eyes of old men. He'd seen grandmothers sleeping under bridges. The city had a way of swallowing people whole and spitting out whatever was left. The girl was wearing a gray hoodie 2 sizes too big, the sleeves hanging past her hands. Her jeans were dirty, torn at one knee. Her shoes were falling apart, the sole of the left one flapping with every step. She had a small backpack slung over one shoulder, and the way she clutched the strap told Boone everything he needed to know. Everything she owned was in that bag. She made it about 30 feet from the clubhouse before her legs gave out. It wasn't dramatic. There was no scream, no stumble, no reaching out for something to hold on to. She just stopped walking. Her knees buckled, and she went down, folding onto the concrete like a marionette with its strings cut. The backpack slid off her shoulder and landed beside her. She didn't move to pick it up. She didn't move at all. Boone flicked his cigarette away and pushed off the wall. 2 of the brothers, Dalton and a younger member named Briggs, were sitting nearby. They looked up. "You see that," Boone said, already moving. He crossed the parking lot in long strides, boots crunching on gravel, and knelt down beside her son. Up close, she was even smaller than she'd looked from a distance. Her face was turned to the side, pressed against the sidewalk. Her skin was pale, almost gray, with a sheen of sweat across her forehead. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, the kind of breathing that comes when the body is running out of things to burn. Boone reached out and gently turned her onto her back. That's when he saw the marks. They were everywhere. Dark bruises wrapped around her forearms like bracelets. Purple and yellow shadows along her jaw. A cut near her hairline, partially healed, partially scabbed over. The kind of marks that don't come from falling down. The kind that come from someone's hands. Boone felt something tighten in his chest. Not anger, not yet. Something deeper than that. Something that went all the way down to the foundation of who he was. He checked her pulse. It was there, faint, thready, but there. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Can you hear me?" "Nothing." "Hey, you're okay, you're safe. Can you hear my voice?" Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her fingers twitched against the concrete. Boone looked back at Dalton and Briggs. "Get the truck." "Should we call an ambulance?" Dalton asked. "By the time they get here, she could be a lot worse. Get the truck. Now." Dalton moved. Briggs stood there, staring at the girl on the ground. "She a runaway?" Briggs asked. "I don't know what she is," Boone said. "But she's not staying on this sidewalk." He scooped her up, and the thing that hit him hardest was how little she weighed. She was nothing. A bag of bones wrapped in an oversized hoodie. He could feel her ribs through the fabric, could feel the way her body hung limp in his arms, like she'd been holding herself together for so long that the moment she stopped moving, everything just let go. Dalton pulled the truck around. Boone climbed into the back seat, holding the girl against his chest. Her head lolled against his shoulder. Her breathing was still too fast, too shallow. "Fresno community," Boone said, "and don't stop for anything." Dalton drove. The streets of Fresno blurred past the windows, strip malls and auto shops and vacant lots. the kind of landscape that looked the same for miles in every direction. Boon kept his hand on the girl's wrist, feeling her pulse, counting the beats, making sure they didn't stop. She opened her eyes once during the drive, just for a second. They were brown, dark, and wide, and filled with a kind of terror that made Boone's stomach turn. She looked at him, looked at the truck, looked at nothing, and then her eyes closed again. "You're okay," he told her. "I've got you." He didn't know if she heard him. He said it anyway. They reached the hospital in 11 minutes. Boon carried her through the emergency entrance, and the triage nurse took one look at the girl in his arms and waved them straight back. No waiting, no paperwork, just a gurney and a curtain and hands moving fast. They took her from him. He let them. He stood in the hallway with his arms at his sides, watching through the gap in the curtain as they worked. An IV went in, monitors went on. A nurse cut away the hoodie, and Boon saw the full extent of what had been done to her. The bruises weren't just on her arms and face. They were across her back, her shoulders, her ribs. Some were fresh, dark purple and swollen. Others were older, fading to yellow and green. Layers of damage stacked on top of each other like geological strata, a history of violence written on skin. The nurse who came out to talk to him was a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a clipboard. "Are you family?" she asked. "No, I found her on the street." She collapsed. "Do you know her name?" "Not yet." The nurse wrote something down. "She's severely dehydrated and malnourished. Her body essentially shut down. We're stabilizing her now." "The marks," Boon said. The nurse looked up. Her expression was careful, practiced. "We've documented them. We'll be filing a report." "With who?" "Social services, standard procedure for a minor." Boon nodded slowly. "Can I stay?" The nurse studied him for a moment, this big man in a leather vest with club patches on his chest, standing in a hospital hallway at 5 in the afternoon asking to stay with a girl he didn't know. "You can wait in the lobby," she said. "I'll let you know when she's awake." Boon waited. He sat in one of those plastic chairs that hospitals buy, by the thousand, the kind that are designed to be uncomfortable enough that you don't fall asleep, but not uncomfortable enough that you leave. He sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor, turning things over in his mind. The marks, the weight of her, the fear in her eyes. Someone had done that to her, someone specific, someone with hands big enough to leave bruises like that on a girl who couldn't have been more than 100 pounds. An hour passed, maybe more. Boon didn't check the time. He just waited. Finally, the nurse came back. "She's awake, she's stable, but she's scared, so go easy." Boon stood up. "Thank you." He walked down the hallway and pushed open the door to her room. She was sitting up in the bed, propped against pillows, an IV line running into the back of her hand. The hospital gown made her look even smaller than she was. Her eyes were open, fixed on the wall across from her, seeing something that wasn't there. When she heard the door, her whole body went rigid. Her hands gripped the edges of the blanket. Her shoulders pulled inward. Every muscle in her body was coiled, ready to run, ready to fight, ready for whatever was coming next. Boon stopped near the door. He didn't move closer. "It's okay," he said. "I'm the one who brought you here. My name's Boon." She stared at him. Her eyes moved over his face, his vest, his hands. She was reading him the way animals read predators, looking for the threat, calculating the distance to the door. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." She didn't speak, didn't nod, didn't move. Boon had been around long enough to know what that silence meant. It meant she'd been hurt by people who said the same words. People who said they wouldn't hurt her and then did. People who said she was safe and then proved she wasn't. Words didn't mean anything to her. Words were just sounds that came before the pain. So he didn't use more words. Not right away. "You hungry?" he asked. That got a reaction. A tiny one. A flicker in her eyes, a slight parting of her lips. The involuntary response of a body that hadn't eaten in too long. She nodded. Barely. "I'll be right back," Boon said. "I'm going to go get you something to eat. The door stays open. You can leave whenever you want. Nobody's keeping you here." He left the room. He went to the hospital cafeteria and bought soup bread, a bottle of water, and an apple. He carried it all back on a tray and set it on the rolling table beside her bed. Then he stepped back all the way back to the far wall and leaned against it. Wren stared at the food. She stared at it the way someone stares at something they desperately want, but are terrified to reach for, because reaching for things means wanting things, and wanting things means losing things, and she'd lost enough already. Then slowly, carefully, like she was defusing a bomb, she reached for the bread. She tore off a piece and put it in her mouth. Then another. Then another. She ate like she was afraid the food would disappear, like someone might come and take it away, like this was a test and she was going to fail it. She picked up the soup and drank it straight from the bowl, both hands wrapped around it, shaking so hard that some of it spilled down the front of her hospital gown. Boon didn't say a word. He just stood there against the wall, arms crossed, watching her eat, making sure nobody came through that door. When she finished, she set the bowl down and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She looked up at him. There was a little more color in her face now, a little more life behind her eyes. "What's your name?" Boon asked gently. She swallowed, took a breath, decided something. "Renjid," she said. Her voice was small and rough, like it hadn't been used in a while. "Ren Holloway." "Ren Boston," Boon repeated, letting the name settle. "That's a good name. How old are you, Ren Mom?" 15. The number landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. 15. A child, sitting in a hospital bed covered in bruises, starving alone. 15 years old. "How long have you been on the streets?" Boon asked. Ren shrugged. "Few months, maybe longer. I stopped keeping track." "What about your family?" Her jaw tightened. Something shifted behind her eyes, a door closing and a wall going up. "Don't have one." Boon didn't push. He knew better. When a 15-year-old is living on the streets, there's always a reason, and the reason is never something she wants to talk about with a stranger in a hospital room. "You got anyone looking out for you?" he asked instead. Ren almost laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the sound of someone who'd heard a joke so dark that the only response was something that resembled laughter, but felt nothing like it. "On the streets, nobody looks out for anyone," she said. "You look out for yourself. That's it. That's the rule." "That why you ended up collapsing in front of a biker clubhouse?" "I didn't plan it," Ren said quietly. "I was just walking, and then I wasn't." Boon pulled the chair a little closer, not too close, just enough that he didn't have to raise his voice. "Ren, hush," he said carefully. "Those marks on your arms, on your face, they didn't come from falling down." Her whole body tensed. The wall went higher. Her eyes darted to the door, measuring, calculating. "I'm not trying to scare you," Boon said. "I just need to know. Who did this to you?" Ren's lip trembled. She looked down at her hands, at the bruises circling her wrists like handcuffs made of shadow. She twisted the edge of the blanket between her fingers, wrapping it tight, then unwrapping it over and over. The room was quiet. The machines beeped. The fluorescent lights hummed. Outside the window, the sun was going down over Fresno, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, and somewhere out there on those streets, the person who had done this was still walking free. Ren didn't speak for a long time. Boon waited. He didn't repeat the question. He didn't push. He just sat there, solid and still, like a wall she could lean against if she chose to. When she finally spoke, her voice was so small he had to lean forward to hear it. "His name is Dominic Voss." Boon didn't move, didn't blink. His hands stayed exactly where they were, but inside something shifted. The way tectonic plates shift before an earthquake. Slow, invisible, inevitable. "Tell me," he said. Ren took a shaky breath. "He runs things, on the streets where I sleep, where a lot of us sleep, over near the railroad tracks under the overpass on Belmont. That whole area, it's his. Runs things, how? He says he's protecting us." Ren's voice was flat now, hollow, like she was reciting something she'd memorized. "He says the streets are dangerous, that without him, we'd be worse off. He says he keeps the bad people away." "But he doesn't." "No." Ren shook her head slowly. "He is the bad people. He just doesn't call himself that." "What does he do?" "He collects, every week. Money, food stamps, whatever you manage to get. He says it's payment. Payment for being allowed to sleep there. Payment for being allowed to exist." Boone's jaw was tight enough to crack a tooth, but his voice stayed level. "And if someone doesn't pay?" Ren looked at him, and for the first time since she had woken up, there was something in her eyes beyond fear. There was rage. Small and buried and barely alive, but there. The last ember of a fire that someone had tried very hard to put out. Then everyone sees what happens, she said. She stopped. Her breathing had quickened. Her hands were gripping the blanket so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Boon said gently, "What did he do to you?" She closed her eyes. A tear slid down her cheek, tracking through the dirt that the hospital staff hadn't quite washed away. "I didn't have anything left. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I had $20. That's it. That was everything. And I was supposed to give it to him the way everyone gives everything to him, but I couldn't. I needed to eat. So I kept it. I went to a gas station and bought a sandwich and a bottle of water, and I thought maybe he wouldn't notice. $20 out of everything he takes, maybe he'd let it go. But he didn't. He never lets anything go." Ren opened her eyes. "Someone saw me. Someone always sees. And they told him because that's how it works. Everyone's watching everyone else because if you're the one who reports, you get a break. You get 1 week where nobody comes for you. So they watch and they tell. And Voss came looking for you." Ren nodded. "The next morning, I was still sleeping. He woke me up by grabbing my arm. Here." She touched her left forearm where the bruises were darkest. "He pulled me up off the ground and dragged me to the middle of the camp where everyone could see. And he held me there." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "He didn't do it in private. That's the thing. He never does it in private. He does it in front of everyone in the middle of the day where every single person can see. Because it's not about the $20. It's about the message. It's about making sure everyone knows what happens when you don't do what he says." Boon sat very still. His hands were clenched into fists on his knees, the knuckles turning white, the old scars across his fingers standing out like seams on a road map. But he didn't speak. He let her finish. "He told everyone to watch. He said, 'This is what happens.' And then he started hitting me. Not with his fists. He's too smart for that. He used his open hand the way you'd hit a dog, slapping. Over and over. My arms, my face, my ribs. And the whole time he was talking, calm, like he was giving a lecture. Like I was an example in a textbook." She was shaking now. The whole bed was trembling with her. "He didn't stop until I fell. And when I was on the ground, he stood over me and said, 'Next time it'll be worse. And there will always be a next time.' Then he walked away, and everyone just stood there. Nobody moved. Nobody helped me up. Because they were all afraid that if they helped me, they'd be next." The room was silent. Boon sat there for a long moment, letting the weight of what she'd told him settle. He didn't say it was going to be okay. He didn't make promises he might not be able to keep. He just looked at her, this 15-year-old girl sitting in a hospital bed, and he saw something that most people on those streets had stopped seeing a long time ago. He saw a person. "How long has this been going on?" he asked quietly. "Months, maybe a year, I don't know. He was already doing it when I got there. People said he'd been at it for a while. Some people said 2 years, some said longer." "Does he work alone?" "No, he's got people, guys who do what he says. They watch, they collect, they make sure nobody tries anything. There's one, his name is Lyall, Lyall Jenner. He's always around. He's the one who does most of the collecting." "And nobody's gone to the police?" Ren looked at him like he'd asked her if the moon was made of cheese. "The police don't care about people like us. We're invisible. We don't exist. And even if someone did go, what would they say? A homeless person got beat up by another homeless person. That happens every day. Nobody's going to investigate that." "He's not homeless," Boon said. "Is he?" How? Ren shook her head. "No, he has a place. A real place. That's the thing. He's not one of us. He just feeds off us." Boon leaned back in his chair. The picture was becoming clearer, sharper, and the clearer it got, the uglier it looked. This wasn't random violence. This wasn't a territorial dispute between people with nothing. This was organized exploitation. A man with a house, with resources, with power, systematically preying on the most vulnerable people in the city, people with no ID, no family, no voice, no way to fight back. And he'd been doing it for years. "Ren," Boon said after a moment, "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to think about it before you answer." She looked at him wary. Do you trust me? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the looking for the angle, looking for the moment when the kindness would flip and become something else. She'd been through that before, more than once. I don't trust anyone, she said finally. That's fair, Boon said. You don't have to trust me, but I need you to believe one thing. What? He's not going to touch you again. Ren stared at him. You can't promise that. You don't know him. Maybe not, Boon said, but I know people like him, and they only have power as long as everyone around them is too afraid to look them in the eye. You can't fight him, Ren said, and there was urgency in her voice now, real panic. You don't understand. If you go after him, he'll find out. He always finds out. And he'll come after me. He'll come after you. He'll make it worse for everyone. Maybe, Boon said. He stood up slowly, adjusting his jacket. Or maybe he's been getting away with this because nobody's ever tried. Ren looked like she wanted to say more, but the exhaustion was pulling her under. Her eyes were heavy. Her body was giving in to the rest it so desperately needed. Get some sleep, Boon said. I'll be here in the morning. Why? She whispered. Because somebody should have been here a long time ago. Her eyes closed. Within minutes, she was asleep. Boon stood there watching her for a moment, this small, battered girl in a hospital bed, and then he stepped out into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind him. He stood there for a long time. The hospital hummed around him, machines and footsteps and quiet conversations. Life going on, the world turning. Boon pulled out his phone and called Dalton. How is she? Dalton asked. Alive, Boon said. For now. What happened to her? Someone happened to her. A man named Voss. You ever heard that name? Silence on the other end, then no. Should I have? You will. I'll tell you about it tomorrow. He hung up and stared at the wall. Voss. He turned the name over in his mind, feeling the weight of it, the shape of it. A name connected to a man, connected to a system that had been grinding people down in his city for years, and nobody had done anything about it. Not the police, not social services, not anyone. Because the people being hurt were invisible. They slept under overpasses and in alleyways and behind dumpsters. They didn't have addresses or phone numbers or anyone who noticed when they disappeared. They existed in the margins of a city that had long since stopped looking at its margins. But Boon was looking now. And he wasn't going to stop. The next morning, the doctor came in to check on Ren. She was better. The IV had done its job. Color was returning to her face. She'd eaten breakfast, all of it, and asked for more. Her vitals were stabilizing. We'd like to keep her one more day for observation, the doctor told Boon in the hallway. But physically, she'll recover. Physically, Boon repeated. The doctor looked at him. The bruising is extensive. We've documented everything and filed a report with social services. When will they come? They've been contacted. Typically, for a minor, they respond within 24 hours. Boon nodded. Thank you, Doc. He went back into Ren's room. She was sitting up in bed looking more alert than the day before. There was something different in her eyes, not trust of Bailey, but the beginning of something that might become trust if it was given enough room to grow. Morning, Boon said. You came back, Ren said. She sounded surprised. I said I would. People say a lot of things. Yeah, they do, Boon agreed. He sat down in the chair. How are you feeling? Better. Still tired, but better. Good. Listen, the hospital filed a report with social services. They're going to send someone to talk to you. The change was instantaneous. The color drained from Ren's face. Her shoulders went rigid. Her hands gripped the blanket. No, she said. Ren. No, I'm not talking to them. I'm not going back. Going back where foster care. She said the words like they tasted bad. That's where I was before. That's where I came from. 3 different homes in 2 years, and the last one was... She stopped. Her jaw clamped shut. Whatever the last one was, she wasn't ready to say it. I'm not going back, she said again, quieter this time but harder. I'd rather be on the streets. Boon studied her. You're 15, Ren. If social services gets involved, they're going to want to place you somewhere. Then I'll leave before they get here. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't bravado. It was a statement of fact delivered with the cold certainty of someone who had learned that the systems designed to protect her were just different kinds of cages. And Boon, looking at the bruises on her arms, at the fear in her eyes, at the way she was already calculating her escape route, couldn't find it in himself to argue with her. "Okay," he said, "here's what we're going to do. I'm going to step outside and make a phone call. You're going to stay here, eat more food and rest, and we're going to figure this out together." "Together," Wren repeated like the word was foreign. "Yeah, together." He stepped into the hallway and called Briggs, who had a cousin who worked for the county. He made some inquiries. He learned that social services was scheduled to send a caseworker at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Then he went back to the cafeteria, bought Wren more food, and brought it to her room. She ate. He waited. They didn't talk much. But the silence between them was different now. It wasn't the silence of strangers. It was the silence of two people who were beginning to understand something about each other. At 1:30, Wren heard a phone ring at the nurse's station. She heard a voice say the words caseworker and minor and 2 o'clock, and something in her face went still. Boon saw it, the calculation, the decision. "Wren Bow," he said carefully, "whatever you're thinking, I have to buy him," she said. She was already pulling the IV from the back of her hand, wincing as the tape came away from her skin. She swung her legs off the bed. "Wait, just wait. I'm not going back to foster care. I told you. And I heard you, but you can't just watch me." She was on her feet now, unsteady but upright. She grabbed her backpack from the chair where a nurse had placed it. She looked at Boone with those brown eyes, and he saw it all. The fear, the determination, the survival instinct that had kept her alive on the streets for months. She wasn't going to be stopped. Not by him, not by anyone. "Wren, listen to me. If you walk out of here and go back to those streets, you're going back to Voss. You know that. I know how to avoid him. You've been avoiding him, and you still ended up in a hospital bed." That landed. He saw it hit. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't sit back down. "What's the alternative?" she asked. "Stay here. Let them put me in another house with another family that doesn't want me. Another place where I'm just a check that shows up on the first of the month." Boone stood up. "The alternative is you let me help you." Why, why do you keep saying that people don't help for no reason? There's always something. There's always a price. The words came out sharp, edged with years of experience that no 15-year-old should have. She was staring at him like she was daring him to prove her right, daring him to reveal the catch, the angle, the thing he wanted in return. Boone met her eyes and didn't look away. "Because I have a daughter," he said quietly. "She's 23 now, lives up in Portland, has a good job, a good life. But there was a time, years ago, when she was in a bad place. Different kind of bad, but bad enough, and I wasn't there. I was too busy being who I was doing what I was doing, and I wasn't there when she needed me." He paused. The hallway outside was quiet. A cart rolled past. Someone coughed in the room next door. "Someone else was there for her," Boone continued. "Someone I didn't know. Someone who had no reason to help stepped in and helped my daughter when I didn't. I never met that person. I don't even know their name, but I owe them everything." He looked at Wren. "So when I see a kid who needs help, I help. That's it. That's the whole reason. There's no price. There's no angle. There's just a man who knows what it feels like to fail someone and doesn't want to do it again." Wren stared at him. Her grip on the backpack loosened just slightly. Her breathing slowed. "I can't go to foster care," she whispered. "I know. And I can't stay in this hospital. I know that too. So what do I do?" Boone thought about it, really thought about it, and then he said the thing that would change everything. "You come with me, to the clubhouse, just for now, just until we figure out the next step." Wren's eyes widened. "The biker clubhouse. It's not what you think." "I don't know what I think." "Fair enough." Boone picked up her backpack and held it out to her. "But I can promise you this. Nobody at that clubhouse is going to hurt you. Nobody is going to force you to do anything. And nobody is going to hand you over to anyone you don't want to be handed over to. You'll have a room, food, and a door that locks from the inside." Wren took the backpack. She held it against her chest the way she always did. "And Voss?" she asked. "We'll deal with Voss." "How puesta? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out." She looked at the door, looked at the window, looked at Boone. The calculation was running behind her eyes, weighing every option, measuring every risk. Then she put the backpack on her shoulder. "Okay," she said. But if anything feels wrong, I'm gone. If anything feels wrong, I'll drive you wherever you want to go myself. They left the hospital through a side entrance. Boon had the truck waiting. He helped Wren into the passenger seat, and she sat there with a backpack in her lap, watching the streets go by with the eyes of someone who knew every alley, every doorway, every shadow. As they drove, Wren suddenly sat up straight. She was looking out the window, her body tense. "Stop," she said. "What? Stop the truck right now." Boon pulled over. They were on a side street a few blocks from the clubhouse next to a parking lot behind a shuttered hardware store. "What is it?" Boon asked. Wren was staring at a dark sedan parked across the street. It was facing the direction of the clubhouse. Inside, a man sat behind the wheel watching. "That's one of Voss's guys," Wren said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I've seen him before. He collects on the south side." Boon looked at the man inside, memorized the license plate. "How long has he been there?" he asked. "I don't know, but he's watching the clubhouse. He's watching your clubhouse." Boon felt the ground shift under him. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. Voss already knew. He knew Wren had talked to someone. He knew she'd been taken to the hospital by a man from the club. And now he was watching, which meant Boon had less time than he thought. "Wren, so," he said slowly. "How did you know that was one of his guys?" She turned to look at him, and in that moment Boon saw something he hadn't expected to see. Not fear, not panic, something harder than that, something older. "Because I pay attention," she said. "I've been on those streets for months. I know every face. I know who collects, who watches, who reports. I know their routes, their schedules, which corners they stand on, and what time they leave." She looked back at the car. "That's Marco. He works the south side on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He drives a dark blue Chevy Malibu. The plate ends in 743. He's got a scar on his left hand from a knife fight last year. And he's not supposed to be here. This isn't his territory." Boon stared at her. "Voss sent him," Wren said quietly, "which means Voss knows about you, and he's trying to figure out how much you know." Boon sat back in his seat. For the first time since this started, he wasn't the one doing the math. Wren was. She'd been doing it the whole time, mapping the system that had trapped her, cataloging its parts, studying its movements. She hadn't just been surviving out there, she'd been watching, learning, waiting. She just hadn't known what she was waiting for. "Wren," Boon said, "you didn't come back to the clubhouse just because you were scared." She looked at him, didn't say anything. "You came back because you saw them watching me. You came to warn me." A beat of silence. "He's going to come after you," Wren said, "the same way he comes after everyone. And you don't even know what his people look like. You don't know who's watching, or where they'll be, or how they operate." She paused. "But I do." The truck idled on the side of the road. The sedan across the street sat motionless. Somewhere in the city, Dominic Voss was making plans. And here in a borrowed truck, a 54-year-old biker and a 15-year-old girl were making plans of their own. Boon put the truck in drive and pulled away from the curb. He took a different route to the clubhouse, avoiding the street where the sedan was parked. Wren guided him, pointing out turns, telling him which roads to take and which to avoid, navigating the city with the precision of someone who'd learned its layout from the ground up. When they reached the clubhouse, Boon parked in the back, out of sight from the road. He turned off the engine and sat there for a moment. "Wren," he said, "I need you to understand something." She waited. "What we're going to do, what comes next, it's going to be dangerous, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't." "I know," she said, "but I'm going to do it anyway, and I'd rather do it with someone who knows what we're up against." Wren looked at him, looked at the clubhouse, looked at her hands, still bruised, still marked, still carrying the evidence of what Dominic Voss had done. "You asked me in the hospital if I trust you," she said. "Yeah, I don't, not yet. But I trust that you're angry, and right now that's enough." She opened the door and stepped out of the truck. Boon watched her walk toward the clubhouse door, small and thin and bruised and 15 years old, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not just anger, not just pity, hope. Because somewhere under all that damage, under all those bruises and all that fear, and all those months of sleeping on concrete and eating out of trash cans, there was a fire. Small, stubborn, refusing to go out. And Dominic Voss, for all his power, for all his cruelty, for all his careful systems of control, had made one critical mistake. He'd let that fire walk out of his territory alive, and now it was burning in his direction. The clubhouse had a back room that nobody used. It had been a storage space once filled with engine parts and old tires, but over the years it had been cleared out and forgotten. There was a cot, a folding table, a lamp with a crooked shade, and a window that looked out onto the alley behind the building. It wasn't much, but it had a door, and that door had a lock, and the lock worked from the inside. Wren stood in the middle of the room, turning in a slow circle, taking it all in. She set her backpack on the cot, unzipped it, checked the contents the way she always did. Everything was still there. Not much, but everything. "Bathroom's down the hall on the left," Boon said from the doorway. "Kitchen's at the end. Help yourself to whatever's in the fridge. Nobody's going to bother you." Wren nodded, but she was already moving to the window. She pulled the curtain aside and looked out at the alley. Her eyes moved left, then right, scanning the shadows the way she'd scanned every alley, every doorway, every dark corner for the past several months. "The sedan," she said, "the one on Millbrook. He'll move by tonight. Voss rotates his watchers every 12 hours. Boon leaned against the doorframe. "You know his rotation schedule." "I know a lot of things." Wren let the curtain fall. She turned to face him. "When you live on someone's streets, you learn how they operate. You learn because your life depends on it." "How much do you know?" Wren sat on the edge of the cot. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. She looked smaller than ever, but her voice was steady. "I know he collects every Thursday and Sunday. Thursday nights he does it himself, goes around to every camp, every corner, takes his cut. Sundays he sends his guys. Lyall Jenner runs the north side. Marco Dunhill handles the south. There's a third one, a guy they call Pinch, but I don't know his real name. He covers downtown." "3 collectors," Boon said, "plus Voss himself, and there are others. People who watch and report. People who get a break on their payments if they keep their eyes open. It's a whole system. And nobody's ever tried to take it apart." "One person did." Wren's voice dropped. "A woman named Nora. Nora Prentice. She's older, maybe 70. She'd been living on the streets for years before Voss showed up. When he started collecting, she was the only one who said no. Stood right up in front of everyone and told him she wasn't paying." "What happened?" "He broke her arm." Wren said it flatly the way you described the weather. Right there in front of everyone. Grabbed her by the wrist and twisted until it snapped. And then he looked at the rest of us and said, "Age doesn't matter, nobody's exempt." Nora never said another word after that. She just pays. Same as everyone. Boon was quiet for a moment. "Where is she now?" "Same place she's always been, under the overpass on Belmont East Side. She's got a spot behind the concrete barrier where she keeps her things. She doesn't move much anymore. Her arm healed wrong. She can't straighten it all the way." Boon filed that away. Every piece of information Wren gave him was another thread in the web, another point on the map, and the map was getting clearer by the hour. "I want to talk to her," Boon said. Wren shook her head. "She won't talk to you. She won't talk to anyone. Not after what he did. Maybe she'll talk to you." Wren looked up. "Me. She knows you. She's seen what happened to you, and she knows what it's like because it happened to her too. That's exactly why she won't talk. She knows what happens when you speak up." "She spoke up alone," Boon said. "That's the difference. She stood up by herself and she got knocked down because there was nobody standing next to her. But what if there was?" Wren stared at him. He could see the wheels turning, the calculation running, the part of her that had survived on those streets by thinking 3 steps ahead. "You want me to go back out there?" she said. "I want you to do what you think is right. But I'm telling you, if we're going to stop Voss, we need more than what I saw from the outside. We need people who were inside it, people who lived it, and you're the only person they might trust enough to listen to." Wren was quiet for a long time. The lamp hummed. Somewhere in the clubhouse, a wrench clanged against metal. Life going on. "If I do this," Wren said slowly, "if I go out there and talk to people, Voss is going to know. His watchers will see me. They'll report back. Then we'll have to be careful." "Careful doesn't always work." "No," Boon agreed, "but it works better than doing nothing." Wren looked at the window again. At the alley, at the world beyond it, the street she knew better than anyone. Okay, she said, but I'm not going alone. You won't be. And I'm not going as bait or as a messenger or as someone carrying your plan. If I go out there, I go because I choose to. And I talk to people my way. Boon nodded. Your way. My way is slow. My way is careful. My way means not pushing people who've already been pushed too far. I understand. Wren unwrapped her arms from her knees and put her feet on the floor. She looked at Boon with those brown eyes, and something had shifted in them. The fear was still there, buried deep, but sitting on top of it now was something else, resolve. The kind that doesn't come from anger or bravery, but from something quieter. From knowing in your bones that you can't keep running because the thing you're running from will always be faster. I'll start with Nora, Wren said. She went the next morning. Boon wanted to drive her, but Wren said no. A truck with a biker at the wheel rolling through homeless camps would draw exactly the kind of attention they couldn't afford. Instead, she went on foot wearing different clothes, a borrowed jacket from the clubhouse, and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. She looked different enough that a casual observer might not recognize her. But Wren wasn't worried about casual observers. She was worried about the ones who got paid to watch. She took a route she'd mapped in her head, avoiding the corners where she knew Voss's people stood, cutting through alleys and parking lots and the back entrances of buildings she'd learned to navigate in the dark. It took her 40 minutes to reach the overpass on Belmont. The camp was smaller than it used to be. Some people had moved on. Others had simply disappeared the way people do on the streets quietly without explanation, like they were never there at all. But the core remained. A dozen tents, a few shopping carts, blankets strung between concrete pillars. And Nora. She was sitting in her usual spot behind the concrete barrier, wrapped in a heavy coat that was too warm for October, but served as both clothing and armor. Her gray hair was pulled back. Her left arm rested in her lap at that wrong angle, the one that told the story of what Dominic Voss did to people who said no. Wren approached slowly. She sat down on the concrete about 5 feet away, close enough to talk but far enough to not crowd. She didn't say anything right away. She just sat there the way you sit with someone who's been alone too long, letting the silence do the work of introduction. After a few minutes, Nora spoke without looking at her. I heard what happened to you. Yeah, Wren said. You're the one he beat in front of everyone, the girl who kept the $20. That's me. Nora turned her head slowly and looked at Wren. Her eyes were sharp despite everything clear and intelligent, and full of a weariness that went all the way to the marrow. And now you're back, Nora said. Why? Because I need your help. Nora laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. My help? I'm a 70-year-old woman with an arm that doesn't work right, sleeping under a bridge. What kind of help do you think I can give? The kind that matters, your voice, your story, what he did to you. Nora's face went still. No, Nora. I said no. Her voice was firm but not angry, just tired. Tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. I tried that once. I stood up. I said no. And you know what? I got a broken arm and a message that everybody in this camp understood real clear. Stand up, get knocked down. That's how it works. It's how it works when you stand up alone, Wren said. You got knocked down because nobody was standing next to you. And who's standing next to me now? You. You're 15 years old. I know how old I am, but I'm not standing alone either. There are people who want to help. People outside this. People with resources. What people? People who are angry enough to do something. Nora studied her. The bikers. The one who brought you to the hospital. Wren didn't deny it. He found me when I collapsed. He took me in. And when I told him about Voss, he didn't look away. So now he's going to what beat Voss up, threaten him. How is that different from what Voss does? It's not about beating anyone up. It's about evidence. Names, dates, records. Building a case so solid that when it lands on someone's desk, they can't ignore it. The police, Nora said, and the word came out like a curse. Not just the police, social services, the district attorney, the press, all of them at once. Nora was quiet for a long time. She looked out at the camp, at the people moving between tents, at the carefully averted eyes and hunched shoulders of people who had learned to make themselves small. You're talking about bringing the whole thing down, Nora said. I'm talking about ending it. And if it doesn't work, then we're no worse off than we are right now, but at least we tried. Nora looked at her arm, at the angle it sat at, the permanent reminder of the last time someone tried. I was a teacher once, Nora said quietly. 32 years, 4th grade, Garfield Elementary over on Maple. I had a house, a car, a pension, and then my husband died and the medical bills ate everything and the pension wasn't enough and one thing led to another and here I am, 4 years under this bridge. She looked at Ren. I tell you that because I want you to understand. I'm not stupid. I'm not weak. I've ended up here because the world has a way of pulling the floor out from under you, and once you fall, there's no ladder back up. I know, Ren said. I'm 15, and I've been on these streets for months. I know exactly how the floor disappears. Something passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. The understanding that comes from shared damage, from knowing what the concrete feels like when you sleep on it, from knowing what it means to be invisible. If I talk, Nora said slowly, if I tell what he did, what happens to me, we protect you, we get your story on record, documented, witnessed, and we make sure it's part of something bigger, something Voss can't make disappear. He broke my arm for saying no to $20. What do you think he'll do if he finds out I'm talking to someone about bringing him down? Ren looked her in the eye. He broke your arm because you were alone. You had nobody watching out for you, nobody standing beside you, nobody to catch you when you fell. That's not going to happen this time. Nora held her gaze. The camp was quiet around them. A bird landed on the concrete barrier, hopped twice, and flew away. All right, Nora said. I'll talk. But not here, not where anyone can see. I'll come back tomorrow. I'll bring someone who can write it all down. Who? A woman named Ruth Calloway. She works with social services. She's safe. Nora nodded slowly. Tomorrow, then. Ren stood up. She looked down at Nora, this 70-year-old woman with a broken arm and 32 years of teaching 4th graders sitting under a bridge because the world had run out of room for her, and she felt something rise in her chest. Not pity, something fiercer. Thank you, Nora. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when it works. Ren came back the next day with Ruth Calloway Briggs's contact from the county. Ruth was a quiet woman in her 50s who carried a leather notebook and asked questions without judgment. She sat with Nora for 2 hours writing everything down. Dates, descriptions, the exact way Voss had grabbed her, the sound her arm made when it broke the silence of the camp afterward. When they were done, Nora sat back against the concrete and closed her eyes. I haven't told anyone that story in 3 years, she said. I didn't think anyone would want to hear it. We want to hear it, Ren said, and so will a judge. But Nora was only the beginning. Over the next several days, Ren went back to the streets. Every day. Carefully, methodically moving through the camps and corners the way she'd always moved, like a ghost invisible by design. She talked to people. Not everyone would listen. Some turned away the moment she opened her mouth. Some were too scared. Some had been broken so thoroughly by Voss's system that they couldn't imagine a world without it. But some listened. A man named Gilbert, who'd had his food stamps confiscated every month for a year. A young woman named Kira, who'd watched Voss threaten her mother with a knife. An older veteran named Ray, who'd been beaten for refusing to hand over his disability check. One by one, Ren gathered them, not with speeches, not with promises, just with the simple, stubborn act of showing up and saying, I believe you, and you don't have to carry this alone. Ruth documented everything. Boon coordinated from the clubhouse, keeping track of the growing file, making copies, making plans. Dalton and Briggs took turns watching the streets around the clubhouse, keeping an eye out for Voss's watchers. But the key to everything, the piece that would make or break the entire operation, was Lyall Jenner. Ren knew it. Boon knew it. Because Lyall had been there for all of it. He'd collected the money. He'd delivered the threats. He'd stood beside Voss while Voss hurt people. And he'd done nothing. But Ren had seen something in Lyall that most people missed. The same thing Boon had noticed weeks ago from a distance. The shaking hands, the averted eyes, the way he flinched every time Voss raised his voice. Lyall Jenner wasn't a predator. He was prey just like the rest of them. He'd gotten pulled into Voss's orbit the same way everyone did, through desperation and proximity and the slow erosion of options until there was nothing left but compliance. Boon had approached Lyall once before, weeks ago, planted a seed. But Wren knew that seed needed a different kind of sunlight to grow. She found him on a Wednesday evening sitting on a bus bench near the railroad tracks smoking a cigarette. He looked worse than the last time she'd seen him. Thinner, more hollow. The circles under his eyes had circles of their own. Wren sat down on the bench beside him. Not too close. Close enough. Lyall saw her and went rigid. He recognized her. Of course he did. He'd been there the day Voss beat her in front of the camp. He'd watched it happen. He'd done nothing. "I don't want any trouble," Lyall said. His voice was rough, strained. "Neither do I," Wren said. "Then what are you doing here?" "Sitting on a bench, same as you." Lyall took a drag of his cigarette. His hand was shaking. The ember trembled in the fading light. "I know who you've been talking to, Pa," Lyall said quietly. "I know what you're doing. You're trying to build something against Voss. And you're going to get yourself killed. Maybe, but that's my choice." Lyall looked at her, really looked at her, at the bruises that were fading but still visible, at the way she sat straight-backed, chin up, 15 years old and refusing to be small. "You were there," Wren said, "when he did this to me." Lyall looked in, Lyall looked away. "I was there. You watched. I watched. And you did nothing." The cigarette shook harder. Lyall didn't answer. "I'm not saying that to make you feel bad," Wren said. "I'm saying it because I know why you didn't do anything. You were scared. The same way everyone's scared. The same way I was scared. The same way Nora was scared when he broke her arm, and everyone just stood there." She paused, let the silence hold. "But I'm 15 years old, Lyall, and I'm sitting here right now talking to you knowing exactly what could happen to me if Voss finds out. I'm terrified. My hands are shaking just as bad as yours, but I'm here anyway." She turned to face him fully. "You're scared of him. I get it. I'm scared too. But I'm 15 and I'm sitting on this bench. I'm doing something." "What about you?" Lyall stared at her. His cigarette had burned down to the filter and he hadn't noticed. The ash fell onto his jeans. "If I talk," he said, "if I tell what I know, he'll kill me. You understand that? Not beat me up, not break my arm. Kill me. If you don't talk, he keeps going, he keeps collecting, he keeps hurting people. And one day he decides you know too much or you're not useful enough or you looked at him wrong, and then what? You think loyalty is going to save you. You think he cares about you." Lyall dropped the cigarette butt and crushed it under his shoe. "He keeps records," Lyall said. So quietly, Wren almost missed it. "What kind of records?" "Everything, names, amounts, dates. He's got a laptop. Keeps it locked up in his house in a safe behind a painting in his bedroom. He's paranoid about it. Doesn't let anyone near it. Have you been to his house?" "A few times to drop off money, but never alone and never for long." "Could you get back into him?" Lyall's face went gray. "You're asking me to steal from Dominic Voss. I'm asking you to help us end this. That laptop is everything. With those records and the testimonies we've already gathered, we have enough to bring the whole thing down. Without it, it's our word against his. And we both know whose word the system is going to believe." Lyall sat there for a long time. The sun had dropped below the roof lines. The street lights were coming on, casting yellow pools across the pavement. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. "He does his rounds on Thursday nights," Lyall said. 8 to midnight, every week. That's when the house is empty. Well, not empty. There's usually one guy watching the place. But I could get past him. I know the routine. Then that's when we move. I unlock the door. That's it. I unlock the back door and then I'm out. Whatever happens after that is on you. That's all we need." Lyall stood up from the bench. He looked down at Wren, and there was something in his expression that she recognized. Not courage, not yet, but the possibility of courage, the space where it might grow if given enough room. "If this goes wrong," he said, "if he finds out it was me, he won't, not until it's too late for him to do anything about it." "You can't promise that." "No," Wren agreed, "I can't. But I can promise you this. When it's over, you get to walk away. You get to start over. You get a life that doesn't belong to Dominic Voss." Lyall stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away into the gathering dark. Wren sat on the bench alone. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She'd held it together the entire time, kept her voice steady, kept her spine straight. But now that he was gone, the fear came flooding back, all of it, everything she'd been holding at bay. She put her hands between her knees and squeezed them tight until the trembling stopped. Then she stood up and walked back to the clubhouse. Thursday came like a held breath. Boon gathered the team in the main room of the clubhouse that morning. Dalton Briggs and a few others. He laid out the plan. Simple. Clean. No confrontation, no violence. Lyall would go to Voss's house at 8:30 under the pretense of dropping off collection money. He'd unlock the back door. Boon and Dalton would slip in, find the safe, get the laptop, and get out. Briggs would stay with the truck engine running 2 blocks away. The whole thing should take less than an hour. And if something goes wrong, Dalton asked. Then we adapt, Boon said. But the priority is the laptop, nothing else. We don't touch the cash. We don't take anything else from that house. We're not thieves, we just need the evidence. Wren sat in the corner listening. She hadn't said much all morning. Her face was drawn tight with the kind of concentration that leaves no room for anything else. What about cracking the safe? Dalton asked. You know how to do that. No, Boon said, but Briggs does. Everyone looked at Briggs. He shrugged. My grandfather was a locksmith, taught me a few things. A few things, Dalton repeated. Enough things. That evening the sun went down over Fresno, painting the sky in streaks of copper and ash. The city settled into its nighttime rhythm, traffic thinning, lights coming on, the world contracting to the space between street lamps. At 8 o'clock, Voss left his house. Lyall had confirmed it. He was making his Thursday rounds, moving through the camps, collecting his payments, reminding everyone who was in charge. At 8:30, Lyall showed up at Voss's house. He knocked on the door. One of Voss's guys answered. Lyall handed over an envelope of cash, made small talk, and left through the front. On his way out, he passed through the kitchen and quietly unlatched the back door. It took him 4 seconds. Nobody noticed. Boon and Dalton were waiting in the shadows behind the house. They watched Lyall leave. They waited 5 minutes to make sure nobody followed him. Then they moved. The back door opened without a sound. They slipped inside. The house was exactly what Wren had described based on what she'd pieced together from Lyall's accounts. Too much furniture, multiple locks on every door, curtains drawn on every window. The architecture of paranoia. They found the bedroom at the end of the hall. The painting Lyall had mentioned was on the far wall. A cheap landscape in a heavy frame hung slightly crooked. Boon lifted it off the wall. Behind it, a safe. Gray metal. Electronic keypad. Dalton looked at Boon. Boon pulled out his phone and sent a single text. 3 minutes later, Briggs came through the back door carrying a canvas bag of tools. He worked in silence, methodically, carefully. His fingers moved across the keypad, tested the seams, pressed his ear against the metal. The minutes stretched. 5, 10, 15. At the 20-minute mark, there was a click. Then another. Then the door swung open. Inside the safe, there were 2 things. A laptop, silver, closed power light off. And beside it, stacks of cash, bundles of bills held together with rubber bands. Thousands of dollars. Money taken from people who had nothing, collected through threats and beatings in the systematic destruction of human dignity. Boon looked at the key. Then he looked at Dalton. Leave it, he said. We just need the laptop. Dalton grabbed the laptop. They closed the safe, hung the painting back on the wall, and moved toward the back door. That's when they heard it. A car engine. Close. Getting closer. Then the crunch of tires on the driveway. The slam of a car door. The 3 of them froze. He's back early, Dalton whispered. His eyes were wide. Boon's mind raced. They were still inside. The back door was 15 feet away. If Voss came through the front, they had maybe 30 seconds before he reached the hallway. Out the back, now. Don't stop. Don't look back. They moved, fast but quiet, through the kitchen, out the back door into the night air. Behind them, they heard the front door open, heard footsteps, heard a voice call out to someone. They didn't stop running until they were 3 blocks away, breathing hard, the laptop tucked under Dalton's arm like a football. Back at the clubhouse, they gathered around the kitchen table. Boon opened the laptop. The screen lit up blue and cold, asking for a password. Briggs tried a few common combinations. Nothing. The screen locked after 3 attempts. We need someone who can bypass this, Briggs said, leaning back. I know a guy, Dalton started. Wait, Wren's voice came from the doorway. She'd been standing there watching quiet the whole time. She walked to the table and looked at the screen. Lyall told me something once, she said, a few weeks ago before any of this. We were talking, just talking, the way you do on the streets when there's nothing else to do. He mentioned that Voss was obsessed with his mother, talked about her all the time, said she was the only person Voss ever cared about. So, Dalton said. So what was her name? Silence. Lyall told me. He said Voss mentioned it once, said his mother's name was Genevieve, and that she died on November 3rd. Wren leaned over the laptop and typed, GENEVIEV 1103. The screen unlocked. The room went still. Everyone stared at the desktop, loading on the screen files and folders appearing one by one. Wren stepped back. Her face was unreadable. Boon looked at her. How did you know that would work? I didn't, she said. But people like Voss, people who think they're untouchable, they always use something personal. Something they think nobody else would know, because they can't imagine that anyone beneath them is paying attention. She looked at the screen. But I was paying attention. They spent the next 3 hours going through the laptop. What they found was worse than anything they'd imagined. Spreadsheets, dozens of them. Every transaction recorded with meticulous precision. Names, dates, amounts collected. Notes beside certain entries. Resisted, corrected. Late payment warning issued. Example made. Cold clinical language for acts of violence and extortion. But it wasn't just one territory. The files showed 3 distinct zones, north side, south side, and downtown. 3 collection areas, 3 sets of victims, 3 layers of exploitation all feeding into one man. Hundreds of people, thousands of dollars, a system running for over 2 years, invisible to everyone except the people trapped inside it. This is it, Briggs said, staring at the screen. This is everything. Boon nodded slowly. Make copies, multiple copies, external drives, printouts, everything. To who? Dalton asked. Boon looked at Wren. She was standing by the window, arms crossed, staring out into the dark. Wren, he said, what do you think? We hand this to the police tonight, we might get a quick arrest. But Voss has lawyers. He'll claim the laptop was stolen. The evidence could get thrown out. Wren didn't turn around. She was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. We don't go to the police yet. Everyone looked at her. If we hand them a stolen laptop, Voss's lawyer tears it apart in court. The evidence gets suppressed. He walks, and then he comes after every single person who talked. She turned from the window. We need the testimonies first. We need every person who gave a statement to Ruth to be on record. We need Nora Gilbert, Kira Ray, all of them. We need their stories documented, witnessed, and filed, and then we deliver everything at once. The laptop data, the witness statements, Ruth's documentation, all of it. To the police, to the district attorney's office, to social services, and to the press. She looked around the room. Because if you give it to one person, it can be buried. But if you give it to everyone at the same time, nobody can look away. Nobody can pretend they didn't know. The light has to be everywhere, all at once, so bright that there's nowhere left to hide. The room was silent. Briggs let out a low whistle. She's 15, he said to no one in particular. Yeah, Boon said quietly. She is. He looked at Wren. At this girl who'd been sleeping in alleys and eating out of garbage cans 3 weeks ago, standing in a room full of bikers laying out a legal strategy that none of them had thought of. We do it Wren's way, he said. Every copy, every testimony, every piece of documentation. We build the whole case and then we drop it all at once. Wren nodded. How long do we need? Dalton asked. Give me a week, Wren said. There are still people I haven't talked to. People who are scared. People who need to see that this is real before they'll come forward. A week is a long time, Briggs said. If Voss figures out the laptop is gone, he won't check the safe until he needs to add something, and he won't need to add anything until after Sunday collections. That gives us until Monday at the latest. That's 5 days, Boon said. 5 days is enough, Wren said. It has to be. She walked to the table, looked at the laptop screen one more time, at the spreadsheets filled with names and numbers, the meticulous records of suffering. He thought nobody was watching, she said. He thought we were invisible, that we didn't count, that nobody would ever care enough to look. She closed the laptop gently. He was wrong. Ren spent the next 5 days doing something that no training manual could teach and no amount of money could buy. She went back to the streets. Every morning, she left the clubhouse before dawn, slipping out the back door while the city was still dark, moving through Fresno, the way she'd always moved, like smoke, like a rumor, like someone who had learned that being seen could get you killed. But she wasn't hiding anymore. She was gathering. Day one, she went back to Nora, sat with her for an hour under the overpass on Belmont while the morning traffic hummed above them. Nora had questions, hard ones. Questions about what would happen when the story got out, what would happen to the people still living in the camps, whether anyone would actually care once the headlines faded. Ren answered every one of them honestly. She didn't make promises she couldn't keep. She didn't paint a picture prettier than reality. She just said, I don't know what happens after, but I know what happens if we don't try, and I can't live with that, can you? Nora couldn't. She agreed to come to the meeting. Day two, Ren found Gilbert. He was camped near the rail yard, a quiet man in his 50s who'd lost his business, then his house, then his marriage in that order. He'd been paying Voss for 8 months. Every food stamp, every dollar he managed to collect from recycling cans. All of it went to a man who'd never spent a single night sleeping on concrete. Gilbert was afraid. Ren sat with him while he cried, and she didn't rush him, didn't push, didn't look away. She just waited until he was done and then said, you don't have to be brave for anyone else. You just have to be brave for yourself one time. That's all I'm asking. He said yes. Day three, she found Kira and her mother, a woman named Phyllis, who walked with a limp because one of Voss's collectors had kicked her in the knee when she was 3 days late on a payment. Kira was 22 and furious, had been furious for a year, but she'd channeled it into silence because silence was the only thing that kept her mother safe. Ren told Kira about the laptop, about the records, about the plan to deliver everything at once. He wrote it down, Kira said, her voice tight with disbelief. He kept records of what he did to us. Every name, every dollar, every threat. Kira's hands balled into fists at her sides. I'll be there, and my mother will too. Day four. Ray, the veteran, 68 years old, 2 tours in Vietnam. A Purple Heart he kept wrapped in a plastic bag inside his coat. He'd fought for his country, and his country had thanked him by letting him sleep under a highway overpass while a man named Dominic Voss took his disability check every month. Ray didn't cry. He didn't get angry. He just listened to Ren with the quiet, steady attention of a man who'd survived worse than this and knew the difference between a fight worth having and a fight you walk away from. This the real thing? He asked when she was done. It's the real thing. Then count me in. Day 5, the last day. Ren had gathered 11 people willing to speak. 11 voices, 11 stories, 11 pieces of a system that had been grinding people down for years while the rest of Fresno looked the other way. But she needed one more. There was a woman she'd been thinking about since the beginning. A woman who slept near the overpass but kept to herself, never spoke to anyone, never made eye contact. She was maybe 40, maybe younger. It was hard to tell. The streets aged people in ways that made years meaningless. She had a scar along her jawline and a way of holding her left arm close to her body, protecting it the way you protect something that's been broken. Her name was Shell. That was all anyone knew. Just Shell. Ren had seen Voss speak to her once. Not collecting. Something else. He'd said something in her ear, quiet, and Shell had flinched. Like she'd been struck, though he hadn't touched her. Whatever he'd said, it had been enough. Shell had handed over everything she had, money, a watch, a pair of shoes that looked almost new, and then she'd walked away barefoot without a word. Ren found Shell sitting behind a chain-link fence near the railroad crossing, eating crackers from a plastic sleeve. She sat down beside him. Shell didn't look up. I know you don't know me, Ren said, and I know you don't want to talk, but I need you to hear something, and then you can decide what you want to do. Shell said nothing. She ate another cracker. Ren told her, all of it. The laptop, the records, the testimonies, the plan. She kept her voice low and steady and did not look at Shell while she spoke because she understood that sometimes the only way to tell someone the truth is to not make them look at you while they hear it. When she finished, Shell was still. The crackers sat untouched in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on something far away. He told me he'd find my daughter, Shell said. Her voice was barely a whisper. He said he knew where she lived. He said if I ever told anyone, he'd make sure she knew what her mother had become. Wren felt the ground tilt under her, the cruelty of it, the precision. Not just physical violence, but the weaponization of shame. The threat aimed not at the body, but at the one thing a person on the streets might still care about. Your daughter doesn't know you're here, Wren asked softly. Shell shook her head. She thinks I'm dead. That's what I let her believe. Because the truth is worse. No, it isn't, Wren said. The truth is that you're surviving. And that takes more courage than most people will ever understand. Shell looked at her for the first time. Her eyes were dark and full of water. Will it work? She asked. Will it actually stop him? I don't know, Wren said. But 12 people have already said they'll speak, 12 voices. If you make it 13, that's 13 stories he can't explain away. 13 people saying the same thing, describing the same man, the same system, the same fear. A judge can ignore one voice. A judge can't ignore 13. Shell was quiet for a long time. A train rumbled past on the tracks. The fence rattled. The sound faded into the distance. 13, Shell keyed, like she was testing the weight of the number. 13. Shell folded the sleeve of Cracker's clothes, tucked it into her pocket. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Okay, she said. I'll be 13. The meeting happened on a Saturday morning. Wren had chosen the location herself. An abandoned warehouse off Industrial Avenue, 3 blocks from the railroad tracks. It had been empty for years, the windows boarded up, the loading dock rusted shut. But the interior was dry, the floor was solid, and most importantly, it was invisible. Nobody drove down Industrial Avenue on a Saturday morning. Nobody had a reason to. They arrived one by one, filtering in through a side door that Dalton had pried open the night before. Nora came first, walking slowly, her crooked arm pressed against her side. Then Gilbert, quiet and pale, clutching a coffee cup like a lifeline. Kira and Phyllis came together, Kira with her arm around her mother. Ray walked in with his chin up and his shoulders squared, the posture of a soldier reporting for duty. Then the others, one by one. Faces Wren knew from the streets, faces she'd sat beside, faces she'd handed food, to faces she'd watched being ground down by a system they couldn't escape. And Shell, last to arrive, standing in the doorway for a full minute before stepping inside. 13 people standing in a warehouse, blinking in the dusty light. Ruth Calloway was there with her notebook. Boon stood near the back wall with Dalton and Briggs present, but not central. This wasn't their moment. They knew that. Wren stood at the front of the group. She hadn't planned a speech. She didn't have notes or a podium or anything that resembled authority. She was 15 years old, 108 pounds, wearing borrowed clothes and sneakers with holes in them. But when she spoke, every person in that room listened. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that everything's going to be fine, she said. I don't know that. I don't know what happens after today. I don't know if the police will care or if the judge will listen or if anything we do in this room will change anything at all. She paused. The warehouse was silent. But I know what happens if we don't do anything, because I've lived it. We've all lived it. We know what it feels like to hand over everything we have to a man who's never gone hungry a day in his life. We know what it feels like to get hit and have nobody help you up. We know what it sounds like when the whole world goes quiet because everyone's too afraid to make a sound. Her voice didn't waver. Her hands didn't shake. Whatever fear was inside her, she'd made peace with it. Not conquered it, just decided it wasn't going to be the thing that defined this moment. I was 15 when Dominic Voss beat me in front of everyone for keeping $20 to buy food. I was 15 when I collapsed on a sidewalk because my body gave up. And I'm 15 now, standing here telling you that I'm done being afraid of him. She looked around the room, at Nora with her broken arm, at Phyllis with her damaged knee, at Shell, who hadn't told anyone about her daughter until yesterday, at Ray, who'd survived 2 wars and shouldn't have had to survive this one. Then Wren reached down and pushed up her sleeve, slowly, all the way to the elbow. The bruises had faded, but the marks were still there. Yellow shadows on her skin, ghosts of the fingers that had gripped her, the hands that had hit her, a map of violence written in the language of damage. He did this to me, she said, because I was hungry, because I wanted to eat, because I had the nerve to spend $20 that he thought belonged to him. She held her arm out so everyone could see. And he would do it again, tomorrow, next week, next month, to any one of you, to all of you. Because that's what he does. That's what he'll keep doing unless someone stops him. She lowered her arm. I can't stop him alone. None of us can. But together, standing in this room telling the truth, we can make sure that everyone knows what he's done. And once they know, they can't unknow it. They can't look away. They can't pretend it isn't happening. She looked at Ruth Calloway, who sat with her notebook, open, pen ready. If you're willing to talk, Ruth is here to listen. She'll write it down. Every word. And when we're done, your stories will be part of something that Dominic Voss cannot make disappear. Nobody spoke for a moment. The warehouse creaked. Dust floated in the shafts of light that came through the cracks in the boarded windows. Then Nora stood up, slowly, painfully using the wall for support. She walked to where Ruth was sitting and lowered herself into the chair across from her. My name is Nora Prentice, she said. I'm 70 years old, and this is what he did to me. She talked for 20 minutes. Ruth wrote every word. When Nora was done, she stood up and walked back to her place. And Gilbert stood up, and then Kira, and then Phyllis, and then Ray, and then the others, one after another, each of them walking to that chair and sitting down and opening their mouths and letting the truth come out. Show went last. She sat in the chair and stared at her hands for a long time before she spoke. When she did, her voice was steady. He told me he'd find my daughter. He told me he'd let her know what I am, where I sleep, what my life has become. And I believed him. I believed him because when you've lost everything, the last thing you have is the story people tell about you. And he knew how to use that. She looked up at Ruth. My daughter's name is Aubrey. She's 19. She lives in Sacramento. She thinks I'm dead. And I'd rather she keep thinking that than know the truth. But I'm tired of letting his threats decide what my daughter gets to know. Ruth wrote it all down. By noon, all 13 testimonies were recorded. Ruth closed her notebook and looked at Wren. This is enough, she said. Combined with the laptop data, this is more than enough. Wren nodded. She looked at Boon. Monday morning, she said. We deliver everything at once. Boon held her gaze. Everything at once. They spent the rest of the weekend making copies. Briggs handled the digital files, burning data from the laptop onto multiple external drives. Ruth compiled the testimonies into a formal report, cross-referencing names and dates with the spreadsheet entries on the laptop. Dalton organized the physical copies packets of evidence destined for 3 different police stations, the district attorney's office, social services, and a reporter named Colleen Weiss from the Fresno Bee, who'd been covering homelessness in the city for 3 years and had been waiting for exactly this kind of story. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. At 8 o'clock, Boon drove to the Central Police Station and hand-delivered a packet to the desk sergeant. At the same time, Dalton dropped identical packets at 2 other precincts across the city. Ruth walked into the district attorney's office with her full report and sat in the lobby until someone agreed to see her. Briggs delivered a flash drive and a printed summary to Colleen Weiss at the newspaper office. And Wren did something none of them had planned. She walked into the social services office downtown, the same office that had tried to send a caseworker to put her back in foster care, and she sat down across from the first person who would see her and said, My name is Wren Holloway. I'm 15 years old. I've been living on the streets of Fresno for the past 7 months, and I need to report a crime. She told them everything, not just about Voss, about the system, about the camps, the collections, the beatings, about Nora's arm and Phyllis's knee and Shell's daughter, about the silence that had allowed it all to continue, the way the city had looked at its most vulnerable citizens and decided they weren't worth the effort. The woman across the desk listened with wide eyes and a mouth that kept opening and closing without making a sound. By Monday afternoon, the first arrest was made. One of Voss's collectors picked up on the south side for extortion. By evening, 2 more were in custody. By Tuesday morning, police had raided 3 locations connected to Voss's operation, seizing cash phones and additional records that matched exactly what was on the laptop. Colleen Weiss ran the story on Tuesday afternoon, front page, above the fold. The headline read, Organized exploitation ring targeted Fresno's homeless for years. The phone lines at the police department lit up. Other victims called in, people who hadn't been at the warehouse meeting, people from parts of the city that Wren hadn't even reached. The scope of Voss's operation was larger than anyone had realized. 3 territories, dozens of victims, tens of thousands of dollars extorted from people who had nothing. Voss went into hiding on Tuesday night. He abandoned his house, cleaned out what cash he could find, and disappeared. But he didn't stay gone long, because Dominic Voss had built his entire world on the belief that he was untouchable, and untouchable men don't run. They come back. They always come back. He came back on Wednesday afternoon. Wren was inside the clubhouse when she heard the engines. Not motorcycles. Cars. 2 of them pulling up hard and fast in front of the building. She went to the window and looked out. Voss was getting out of the lead car. He was bigger than she remembered, or maybe she was just seeing him differently now, seeing past the fear to the man underneath. He was in his late 40s, heavy-set, with a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. Behind him, 3 men climbed out of the second car. Big men, angry men, the last of his crew, the ones who hadn't been arrested yet. Boon was outside working on his bike. He stood up slowly when he saw them coming. "You made a mistake," Voss said. His voice carried across the parking lot like a threat made solid. "A big one. You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Boon said. He didn't raise his voice, didn't move. Just stood there, wiping his hands on a rag, looking at Voss the way you'd look at a stain on the floor. "A man who beats up homeless kids and 70-year-old women and calls himself powerful. That's who I'm dealing with." Voss's face twisted. "Where's Lyall? Where's that rat?" "Somewhere you'll never find him. He's dead. You know that. He's a dead man." "No," Boon said. "He's free, which is more than you'll ever be." That's when Voss snapped. He lunged forward and his men moved with him. The clubhouse door banged open. Dalton came out first, then Briggs, then 4 others. They didn't rush. They didn't shout. They just spread out across the lot, solid and calm and very much ready for whatever came next. The fight was short. Voss's men were street-level enforcers used to intimidating people who couldn't fight back. The club members were something else entirely. Within minutes, it was over. Voss was on the ground, breathing hard blood on his lip. His men were pinned, held down, going nowhere. Dalton looked at Boon. "We could finish this right now." "No," Boon said. "That's not how we do this. We're not him." He pulled out his phone and called the police. "I've got Dominic Voss here at our clubhouse on Ridgeland Avenue. He just showed up looking for a fight. You might want to come get him." The sirens came fast. When the police pulled up, they saw Voss on the ground, the club members standing in a loose circle, and security cameras mounted on the corners of the building, recording everything. They cuffed Voss, read him his rights, loaded him into the back of a cruiser. As they were putting him in, Voss turned and looked back at the clubhouse. His eyes swept across the lot, across the bikers, searching for something. He found it. Wren was standing in the doorway, small, still, watching him with those brown eyes. "This isn't over," Voss said, his voice low and full of venom. Wren looked at him, and for the first time since the day he dragged her in front of the camp and beaten her for $20, she didn't feel afraid. "Yeah," she said quietly, "it is." The cruiser pulled away. Voss's men were loaded into separate cars. The sirens faded into the distance, and just like that, it was done. Wren stood in the doorway for a long time after the police left. Boon walked over and stood beside her. Neither of them spoke. They just stood there, watching the empty street where the cruisers had been, listening to the silence that comes after something breaks and doesn't break back. "You okay?" Boon asked finally. Wren thought about it. Really thought about it. "Not yet," she said, "but I think I'm going to be." Lyall Jenner was put into witness protection. Given a new name, a new city, a new start. Ruth Calloway's report was entered into the official record. The district attorney filed 37 charges against Dominic Voss, ranging from extortion to assault to racketeering. Colleen Weiss won an award for her coverage, and Wren Holloway was placed with a foster family. Not through the usual system. Ruth had pulled strings, found a family she'd vetted personally. A couple in their 50s, no other children, a quiet house on a quiet street with a room that had a lock on the inside of the door. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe. And for a girl who'd spent 7 months sleeping on concrete, safe was everything. Before she left the clubhouse, Boon pulled her aside. He handed her an envelope. "What's this?" Wren asked. "Open it." Inside was a bank statement, an account in her name, balance $500. "Every month," Boon said, "we're going to add to it. Not much. Whatever we can. And when you're ready, when you're 18, when you're on your own, it'll be there. Wren stared at the statement. The numbers blurred as her eyes filled. Why? She whispered. Because you deserve a future, Boon said simply. And somebody should have made sure you had one a long time ago. Wren hugged him, tight, the way you hold on to something when you're afraid it's a dream and you'll wake up and it'll be gone. Thank you, she said, for everything. You don't have to thank me, Boon said. Just promise me something. What? Promise me you'll remember. When things get hard, and they will remember that you're stronger than you think, and you don't have to face it alone. I promise, Wren said. She let go, picked up her backpack, the same one she'd been carrying the day she collapsed on the sidewalk outside this building. She put it on her shoulder and walked out the door. 5 years later, Wren Holloway stood in front of a mirror in a small studio apartment on the second floor of an older building on the east side of Fresno. She was 20 years old. Her hair was longer now, pulled back in a loose braid. Her face had filled out, lost that hollowed look. She looked healthy, strong, like someone who'd walked through fire and come out the other side with her spine intact. She grabbed her keys, her backpack, and a thermos of coffee and headed out the door. College classes started in an hour. She was studying social work at Fresno State. 2 years in maintaining a 3.4 GPA while working part-time at a coffee shop near campus. Every dollar budgeted, every hour accounted for. Living lean, living careful, but living. And every semester when tuition was due and the numbers didn't quite add up, an envelope would arrive. No return address, just enough to close the gap. She always knew who it was from. Today was different. Today Boon had called and asked her to come by the clubhouse. Said he wanted to show her something. She parked her car, a 14-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and 200,000 miles on the odometer, and walked up to the building. It looked the same, a little more worn maybe, but solid, real. The kind of place that doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. Boon was at the table in the corner. He looked older, more silver in his hair, a few more lines around his eyes. But when he saw her, he smiled the same way he'd smiled the first time she'd told him her name in that hospital room 5 years ago. Wren, good to see you. You too, Ikwa. She hugged him. It's been a while. You've been busy. College doesn't leave a lot of free time. That's how it should be. He gestured to a chair. Sit down, I want to show you something. He pushed an envelope across the table. Wren opened it and pulled out a bank statement, her name at the top. She looked at the balance and her breath stopped. $7,843. I don't understand, she said. I thought there was just a few hundred. There was, at the start, but every month we added a little more, 50 here, 100 there, whatever we could manage. 5 years adds up. You've been doing this the whole time. Yeah. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to focus on your life, Boon said, Anonton. On school and work, on figuring out who you wanted to be, not on money. We wanted you to know it was there when you were ready. He paused. And now you're ready. Wren stared at the number, almost $8,000, more money than she'd ever had. Enough for another year of school, enough to stop worrying about whether she could afford textbooks next semester, enough to breathe. This isn't charity, Wren, Boon said. This is what people do when they give a damn about each other. She wiped her eyes. You barely knew me. I was just some kid who collapsed on your sidewalk. You were never just some kid, Boon said. You were the bravest person I'd ever met. You just needed someone to see it. Wren laughed through the tears. It was a real laugh, full and warm, the kind that comes from a place so deep you forget it's there until something reaches down and finds it. I used to think nobody cared, she said. I used to think I was invisible, that I didn't matter. You were never invisible, Boon said. You just hadn't found the right people yet. They sat there for a while. Comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Then Wren smiled. You know what's strange, she said. What? 5 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd die on those streets. And now I'm in college. I have an apartment. I have a future. She looked at the bank statement again. And it all started because you asked me one question. What question? Who hurt you? Wren's voice was soft. Nobody had ever asked me that before. Nobody had cared enough to ask, but you did, and it changed everything. Boon smiled. Sometimes that's all it takes, one person caring enough to ask. After she left the clubhouse, Wren didn't go to class. Not right away. She drove across town to the part of Fresno where she used to live, the streets she used to sleep on, the alleys she used to hide in, the overpass on Belmont where Nora used to sit with her broken arm. It looked different now, cleaner, fewer tents. The city had started paying attention after Voss was convicted. Programs had been funded, shelters expanded, outreach workers deployed. The camps hadn't disappeared entirely. They probably never would, but the darkness that had hung over them like a fog had lifted at least a little. Wren parked and got out. She was meeting the volunteer group she'd been working with for the past year, a food distribution program that set up every Saturday morning on this same stretch of sidewalk. She'd been here every week, rain or shine, handing out meals, sitting with people, listening. She opened the trunk of her car and pulled out boxes of sandwiches, fruit, and bottles of water. One of the other volunteers, an older woman named Maria, waved at her. "Morning, Wren." "Morning. What do we have today?" "Turkey and cheese, apples, water, same as always. You take the north side." "On it." Wren picked up a box and started walking. She knew these streets by memory. Every corner, every alcove, every spot where someone might be sitting with their back against a wall, hoping to be invisible, and hoping at the same time that someone would see them. She found the girl near the railroad crossing, sitting on the ground beside a chain-link fence, knees pulled up, arms wrapped around them. She couldn't have been more than 16, thin, tired, eyes that moved too fast, scanning everything, trusting nothing. Wren sat down on the ground beside her, not too close. "Hey," she said, "you hungry?" The girl looked at her sideways, suspicious, calculating. "Who are you?" "Just someone with too many sandwiches. You want one turkey and cheese." The girl hesitated. Her eyes moved to the box, to Wren, back to the box. The internal math of someone who'd learned that kindness usually came with conditions. Then she reached out and took a sandwich. She unwrapped it fast and ate without stopping, the way Wren used to eat when every meal might be the last one for a while. Wren watched her and saw herself, 5 years younger, 5 years hungrier, 5 years more afraid. The same hoodie 2 sizes too big, the same backpack clutched like a shield, the same eyes that couldn't stop looking for the threat. "What's your name?" Wren asked. "Tessa," the girl said quietly. "I'm Wren." Tessa finished the sandwich and looked at her with something that wasn't quite trust, but wasn't quite suspicion either. Something in between. A door cracked open an inch. "Why are you being nice to me?" Tessa asked. Wren smiled. It was a sad smile, heavy with everything she'd been through and everything she knew this girl was going through right now. "Because I used to be you," she said, "right here on these same streets, sleeping in the same alleys, eating from the same dumpsters, afraid of the same things." Tessa stared at her. "You were homeless. For 7 months. 5 years ago, I was 15. What happened?" "Someone saw me," Wren said simply. "I collapsed on a sidewalk and a man I'd never met picked me up and took me to the hospital. And when I woke up, he asked me a question that nobody had ever asked me before." "What question?" Wren looked at Tessa, at the bruise on her cheekbone that she was trying to hide with her hair, at the way she held her right wrist gingerly like it hurt to move, at the fear that lived behind her eyes like a permanent resident. "Who hurt you?" Wren said softly. Tessa went still. Her face changed. The mask she'd been wearing, the one she'd built to keep the world out, cracked. Just a fraction. Just enough. Her eyes filled with tears. "Nobody's ever asked me that," she whispered. "I know," Wren said. "Nobody asked me either, until someone did. And that changed everything." She pulled a card from her pocket. On it was the name of a shelter, a phone number, and then her own number, written on the back in blue ink. "You don't have to tell me anything right now," Wren said. "You don't have to trust me. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But when you are ready, whenever that is, you call that number. I'll answer, and we'll figure it out together." Tessa took the card. She held it with both hands, reading it, turning it over, touching the handwritten number on the back like she was making sure it was real. "Together," she said, tasting the word. "Together." Wren stood up. She picked up the box of food and set an extra sandwich and a bottle of water beside Tessa. "I'll be back next Saturday," she said. "Same time, same place. If you're here, I'll bring more food. And if you're not here, I'll look for you. Because that's what we do." She started to walk away. "Ren, Trey," Tessa called after her. Ren stopped and looked back. "Thank you." Ren smiled. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when it works." The words came out before she thought about them, and it took her a moment to realize where she'd heard them before. Nora. Under the overpass. 3 years ago. She carried those words with her the rest of the day. That night, Ren sat in her apartment with the bank statement on the table in front of her next to her textbooks and a cold cup of coffee. The city lights of Fresno glowed outside her window, orange and white stretching to the horizon. She opened the notebook she'd been keeping for the past year. Inside were names. Every person she'd met on the streets, every person she'd talked to, sat with, handed a sandwich to given her phone number to. Some of them had called, some of them hadn't. Some of them had found shelters, programs, a way forward. Some of them were still out there. She turned to a blank page and wrote a new name at the bottom of the list. Tessa. She closed the notebook and looked out the window. 5 years ago, she'd been a girl with bruises on her arms and nothing in her pockets, lying on a sidewalk in front of a building she'd never meant to find. She'd been invisible. She'd been alone. She'd been certain, with the quiet certainty of someone who'd run out of reasons to hope, that her life was already over. And then a man had knelt down beside her and asked a question. One question. 3 words. The simplest thing in the world. Who hurt you? And those 3 words had cracked something open. Not just in her, but in everyone they touched. In Nora, who'd been silent for 3 years. In Gilbert, who'd been paying a tax on his own existence. In Shell, who'd let a man use her daughter as a weapon against her. In Lyall, who'd been drowning and didn't know there was a surface. In 12 people standing in a warehouse finding their voices for the first time. 3 words. That's all it took. Not to fix everything, not to make it all better, but to begin, to crack the silence, to let the light in. Ren picked up her phone and looked at it. No missed calls from Tessa. Not yet. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe never. But the number was out there. The card was in Tessa's pocket. And somewhere on the streets of Fresno, a 16-year-old girl was holding a piece of paper with a phone number on it, turning it over in her hands, deciding whether or not to believe that someone on the other end would actually answer. Ren set the phone down. She looked out the window one more time. Sometimes being seen is what saves a life, and sometimes it gives you another one.